Thank you all for coming. Today, our focus is teaching the writing process across the curriculum, and the panel is put together by Brandy Ford Griffin of the English Department and the Right Place. Thank you for doing that. It's a lot of work, Brandy. And also thank you to Brandy Ugent for videoing it for us and putting the website together. Thank you very much for that. So, no further ado, if you'd like to introduce the panel and just take it away.
Well, my name is Brandy Ford Griffin, and as Ron had said, I'm an adjunct instructor with the English Department and also one of the writing consultants at the Right Place. And on the panel today, we have Mark Stelter, who is going to be representing criminal justice and how writing assignments are implemented in criminal justice. And then he's going to also represent Craig Livingston from the History Department and discuss how writing assignments can be implemented in the History Department. Then we have Larry Loomis Price. He's with the Biotech Department, and he's going to address writing assignments and rubrics within the Biotech Department. And then we have from our Political Science Department. So today we just want to talk about not just writing assignments, but implementing writing as a process across the disciplines. We know all of our students come to English 1301, they come to English 1302. Their objective is to succeed in those classes, but a lot of times they don't necessarily transfer the learning that they've had in those classes to writing assignments outside of English. So they miss out on a lot of opportunities to really get familiar with the material, to connect to the material, to break it apart and understand each piece of the topic that we're trying to teach them, and then we miss the opportunity to synthesize and see how those contribute to the larger picture. So what we want to do today is talk about how we can implement assignments that will encourage them to break writing down into a process where they give themselves the opportunity to understand what they know and what they don't know. Give themselves the opportunity to personally, academically, and professionally connect to this new material so that they can integrate it into their own learning, and that they can take that learning with them beyond the classroom, beyond their degree, and hopefully beyond their careers. So that's kind of what we want to talk about today. I do have a handout that I believe everybody has at this point, and it just highlights some different points about how the writing process mirrors the learning process, and that cognitive development as students are learning bits and pieces of new information, so that we can see how this learning and this writing is a great marriage for our students. And I would like to go ahead and start talking about bringing these concepts into the fields, and we're going to start with Larry, and then we'll work with finish with Britt. So take it away.
Thank you. I have no PowerPoint or overhead, but I do want to write a couple things on the board. I changed my writing assignments very dramatically after a Writing Across the Curriculum seminar that was held on campus about 5 summers ago, and the process that was discussed in that seminar. The way writing is normally taught in the sciences is one of 2 ways. One is to do term papers, and the idea of a term paper, I think, can adequately be discussed in any field, so I'm not going to talk about those. I will talk about, instead, laboratory reports. Now, why do we care whether or not scientists learn how to write? In most classes in the sciences, we don't. All right, we don't grade it, we don't teach it, we don't bother with it. We believe that we're teaching critical thinking, so we test that using examinations. But in biotechnology, which is a workforce program, we have been told consistently by the employers that one of the 2 things that our students fail in typically is they can't write in such a way that somebody can read what it is that they're doing. All right, and so this plays all the way up into middle management when people can't write a paragraph that the Food and Drug Administration can read and understand what the company is doing. So we have a mandate from the employers that our students learn how to write adequately, even if it's just relatively short passages. All right, so we have a mandate. And the way I decided to teach that, that particular criterion was in lab reports, and I went through a program where lab reports were required every week. Every time you did something, you wrote up a lab report. And there wasn't even any attention paid to how well you wrote. Nobody cared. You had to prove what you had done, whether or not you understood it, you went on, and whether or not you could write was completely ignored. But I thought it might be interesting to try and grade the lab reports for their writing. And now, the first thing that I learned is that you cannot grade every lab report. Right? You can't do that, at least not for writing, because I would get an assignment every week, and what would happen is the students that got A's on their lab reports the first week would be the same students that got A's on their lab reports the last week, and the students that did poorly the first week would continue doing poorly all the way along. And I was grading something that I wasn't teaching, all right? Which would be like assigning my students grades based on their IQ tests or something like that. It had nothing to do with what the course was supposedly teaching. So I thought if I was going to grade it, I needed to teach it. All right, so, and I came upon the method, as I said, from the WAC symposium, that the first thing you had to do was have a goal, all right? My goal was to teach my students how to write a relatively short passage that could be read. I decided that the reasonable goal was that I would like them to be able to write 500 readable words in a row, all right? That was my goal. And you had to have a method, right? And my method was to use the introduction to a lab report, intro to these lab reports. And then I had to have a plan, and my plan was that I would tell the students what I wanted and give them a rubric, so they had some idea about what I would be grading them on. All right, so give them a rubric, and then give them one example of good writing. And so I give them a copy of a lab report from previous classes that I gave an A to, a 20 out of 20. So for me, 20 out of 20 is what we're looking for. All right, and so give the students that, and then give them a lab report. And we typically do this the first time about soon, about 5 to 6 weeks into the semester, because I need to teach a bunch of things before that happens. And so I give them the lab reports, and I ask them to write something, and then I give them feedback. So we give the feedback, and they get something that's all marked up, and it's a horrible process for them, because there's red ink all over it, and I give them the rubric, and I say, on this part you got 2 out of 5, right, or 0 out of 5. And then I need to give them a reason to succeed, and I tell them I'm going to give them an incomplete if they can't give me a lab report that passes my standard. It has to be at least a 15 out of 20. So they know from the beginning that if they can't write a lab report, they cannot get a grade in my class. They have to get it to the end. So they have to shoot for 15 out of 20. The average on the first run through on the first lab report is an 11. Okay, that's the average is about an 11. There are some students who get 20 out of 20 the first go around, but usually they already have master's degrees. Right? So the average is 9. And then, here's the important part and the hard part, there's the repetition. All right? So I give them this marked up lab report, and they give it, I give it to them, and they look over it, and they come back with tears in their eyes or whatever. And I give them options about what to do. They can go to the right place. They can go to the ELC. They can work with me. If they have English as a second language, which they can have their lab reports and work with somebody who has English as a first language, which is an issue. And then we go through evolution, although it's guided evolution. We keep doing this. All right. They can turn that lab report in as many times as they want, but usually it only takes one time. All right. For the average student, they can get it up to 15 out of 20 on the second try. All right. With some few students, it takes 3 tries, and those are almost always students who have English as a second language. So they go through this guided evolution, repetition, feedback, and so on. And then we get to testing, because I do this with a second lab report. All right. So I only do this twice, however, because it takes at least 5 weeks before I get to the point where I feel that I can give them the first assignment. And then it takes us 3 or 4 weeks to do this process. All right, and then I give them the second one, and the average on the second lab report is passing. All right, the first time through, the average is passing. So they go from an average of 9 to an average of 16 or so with one attempt. And I think some of that is knowing what I want, but the other thing I'm hoping is that they know what their resources are, and it can immediately go, and if they don't have English as their first language, they can ask for somebody to proofread their writing before it gets turned in. And so I've done this consistently now, at least one class per semester for almost 10 years now. And I've seen exactly the same thing. So I will say that here is my graph, which is the one thing that I might have put on a PowerPoint. You'll just have to accept the fact that I can do this. All right, so here's 10, here's 15, which is passing, that's their goal. All right, first try, 9, second try, 17, this is on the first lab report. And then a few trickle in after that, people are willing to give it a third try or so, and it edges up a little bit after that. I've never had anybody try more than 3 times. That's the first lab report. The second one, and then by then we run into the end of the semester, so we don't have a lot of repeats on that. So that's my goal though, and the nice thing about this is when I grade them on the second lab report, I don't feel like I'm giving them an IQ test. I'm actually grading them on something that I bothered with and taught them. The nice thing about this is I have follow-up because I teach the same students sometimes in several subsequent semesters, and I do the same thing in every class that I teach in biotechnology. And the wonderful thing about teaching this in the second and third semester is that I can assign the first lab report earlier and they already know what I want, and so the average grades are much higher that time around. It's not entirely the same group of students, so I do have some that I have to teach. So that's what I do. That's how I teach. That's how I teach science in biotechnology and writing in biotechnology. The nice thing about it, of course, is that I can make the sort of draconian edict. I will give you an incomplete if you don't pass this requirement. I'm not sure I could get away with that in biology. Probably what I would do is end up failing more students. But in biotech, usually they want to pass, and so I tell them, if you don't do this, you don't pass, and they do it. Questions?
Didn't I hear you say long time ago when you talked about this, that you used to assign more lab reports than you do now?
Oh, many more. I used to assign essentially one every week. Starting in the second or third week of the semester, I'd assign one every week. I had 2 choices with that. The first is not to grade grammar and so on, all right, just to grade on the content of the science, which is kind of was my fallback position because that's what I learned. Nobody ever graded my grammar in science classes, which is what we do generally. Or to try and grade it, but it wasn't so much that it was so much work, it was that it was very, it was kind of appalling to me that it was giving the same failing grades to the same students over and over again. And that's why I turned away from that, because I felt like I wasn't teaching them anything. I was giving them an F all the way through the course and failing them in something that I had never bothered to teach them how to do.
What is the different type of error that you see first go around versus second go around?
All right. The rubric is let's see if I can remember. References, H and W. All right, so I have the general plan. All right, so when I say I want 500 words written on a given subject, and I needed to start from general and move to specific and so on, the plan. The second one is their ability to reference, to cite within the work and in the bibliography and so on. This one is, do they understand what they're doing? Can they write a hypothesis? And when they get to the point of this, do they get to something that teaches me what they are going to do specifically as opposed to generally, this is why I like science. And then this is the writing, which is the grammar. All right. I see errors in all of these. This one is the one that I'm most likely to see zeros in. All right, I will often see a 0 because I only give them a certain number of grammatical errors before it goes to 0. It goes to 0 very, very grammatically. And then this one is the other one where I see major problems that can be rectified easily. All right. I see planning problems, but normally I just have to tell them again what it is that I want them to do. They normally fix plan. Hypothesis is also fairly easy for me to fix in the context of science. I can talk to them about what it was that they were doing and why. All right, so that's typically something they do with me. These are things that I can't do. All right, I can't. Honestly, I'm not qualified to teach those things. I'm the wrong person to help them with those things. All right, so for these 2 things, what I do is I send them off to the library usually for this, or to the ELC or to the right place for this. And so the sorts of errors that I see that go from 0 to 5 that don't involve either of these 2 things. I tell them the standard that I have for references, go ask a librarian, print out what it is, learn how to cite within the text. Give me a bibliography that makes sense with whatever standard is. And then this one, You need to prove, you need to understand how a grammar checker works. You need to have somebody else read your writing before you turn it in.